Okay. So you all should be able to see and hear Miss Jones right now. I'm going to mute yourself in a moment, or mute myself in a moment. But I'm really excited to invite Miss Jones on to speak with you all. As you all remember, we've studied, the civil rights movement and some of the Black Power movement already, and she was involved in several campaigns during the civil rights movement, including the Freedom Rides and Girard College desegregation, also involved in some gender-based discrimination, girls' sports discrimination, Title IX related cases, and as an educator, coach, and I just am really excited to bring her in to speak with you. So she'll share some stories with you all. I gave her free reign to kind of speak about whatever she thought would be interesting for you all, and then you can kind of ask lots of questions. You can use the chat to ask questions. After she's done speaking, you'll be able to unmute yourself and also and ask questions as well. But I'll keep track of questions in the chat and bring them up when the time's appropriate. So at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Ms. Jones. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to you for asking me, and I like to share a little bit of my story. A lot of times, particularly young folks who live in the North, just get a chance to read about it, and not too many people in the North that might be still living participated in a lot of the civil rights struggle. A great many of them came from all over the country, but the majority of them were in the South, and they came from the South. I got involved with this civil rights thing. I guess not really. I guess really by accident. I grew up in a household. I grew up in Philadelphia. I tell people I was Philadelphia born, Philadelphia bred. When I die, I'm Philadelphia dead. This is my town. I love it. And my mother always told me I could do or be anything I wanted to be if I put my mind to it. So after high school, I went to Morgan State University, which is 99 miles from Philadelphia. And during that time, just as a freshman, there was a shopping center across the street from the university. And so my roommate and I, we decided to go shopping. And there was a movie house there. And I said, oh, that's a picture. And I'm a real movie buff. I said, well, why don't see, if we can, how much it costs and when the next show is going to start. And she, when I got to the counter and asked about the movie, she told me very frankly that we don't serve your kind. So I was a bit taken back because coming from Philadelphia, I've gone to all the movies in Center City or even in your neighborhood. And so I immediately got offended, and I went to the student government office and told the president of the student government office, we have to do something about that movie, only to be informed that they had been doing something about the entire shopping center, because at that particular time, we're talking about 1962, 62, 63. You could not try on clothes. You could not try on shoes. You had to buy everything right off the rack, whether it looked good on you or not. And then once you buy it, of course, you could not, bring it back. And, my thing was that, I could try on clothes at John Wanamaker's or wherever. And this is one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of the Macy's stores, because they were part of the Heck Company. The Macy Company was part of the Heck Company. And I don't do a lot of shopping at Macy's because of the experience that I had. So from there, we were picketing, and we were really getting into it every single night. And the next morning, we were painting for a while, and then, you know, we would stop when the movie closed and the shopping center closed. And then it got to the point where we were trained to sit, we were trained to lock arms, and we were trained to just go inside of the movie theater. And some of the kids would get arrested, and they would be out the next morning by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, so that they could go to their classes. Of course, when I decided to go, my roommate and I, we decided to go. And they always told us, take your books with you. And so we took our books with us. And this particular night, we went and we got put in jail overnight, crowded, because by this time, students from Johns Hopkins, students from Goucher and Loyola were coming over, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. They were coming up and picketing with us. So the next morning when we got in front of the judge, and I'm going to use language that is not acceptable today, but the judge told us, and it was a mixed group, told us that he was sick and tired of us niggas, you know, coming into court, clogging up his court. So what he did that particular night, 750 of us were arrested. And he fined us $500 for trespassing and $100 for disturbing the peace. So 750 times 60, do the math. And I said to my roommate at the time, they put us in the lunchroom. I said, you know, and they served us French fries, hamburgers, and Coke, Coca-Cola. And I said, you know, I think this is the last good meal we're going to have for a while. And so the next thing we know, we were going down the hallway. We got into these big trucks and we went rolling down in the Baltimore streets. And I could hear these doors clanging behind us. And there we were in the Baltimore City Jail for the next 5 days. And at the end of the 5th day or the 6th day when we got out, the man who owned the movie theater sold it. I don't know who he sold it to, but he sold it, closed it up, and he sold it. Because every day more and more and more students were coming into the jail. We were just really crowding out the jails there in Baltimore. So that started my civil rights thing. We went into Salisbury, Maryland. We went into Cambridge, Maryland. These are cities on the Eastern Shore that were very, very segregated. And we met with the dogs and the water hoses and the chains and things of that nature. Kids from Howard University came with us one time from DC, and their bus got bombed, so we had to all pile in on one bus. And I just continued on. I went to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and helped people, registered people to vote. I walked with a lady for a mile by the name of Miss Ina Pigford, and she went to the courthouse to register for the vote for the first time, but Miss Pigford couldn't read or write, and all she could do is put an X and scribble something so that she could vote. All of these things that we did, I want you to know, they weren't done nilly-willy. You've seen the movie, if any of you get a chance, watch the movie Mississippi Burning. And that was 3 young men who were part of the civil rights movement down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And I saw them, you know, they were introduced to us. And after we had come back to Philadelphia about a week and a half, about 2 weeks later, we found out that they had been lynched. All 3 of them. So it was a rough time. It was an interesting time. And I know when I talked with the other class, one of the questions they asked us was, asked me was, what was I thinking when I was doing that? And I was saying, no, we weren't thinking about anything except for the fact that our friends were doing it. And after we walked and registered people to vote, it was party time. Just like any other college students, we partied. It was a social thing that was going on. And I don't think any of us, and when I talked with my friends now who was part of this, and we talked about the fact we had no clue. We had no idea that what we were doing would have such an impact on the United States. I went on the march got on the bus. I went on the march to Washington. I tease people because there's a picture, and all you can see is just a sea of people all around the pool. And I always say, I'm here. You can see my picture. I'm over here on the right-hand corner with my feet dangling in the water while all the speeches were going on. And we were having a good time. We weren't, we knew what we were doing, but yet it was still a social action type of a situation. I had the opportunity to take my granddaughter, and I had her walk with me the same area that I walked 50 years ago with the March to Washington. So after graduation, I come home, I figure, well, okay, I'm going to I'm going to get ready to become a teacher in the school district of Philadelphia. And here I am, right smack dab in another march, marching around Girard College. And I grew up one block away from Girard College. And Girard College was, yes, that's a very interesting story, how Mr. Girard got his money to build this Girard College. And it was only for white orphan males. And that's the way, but the money that was being used for Girard College was public money. So that's why there was such a brouhaha about Girard College by letting in other people of color. And then, of course, after in the 70s, they started allowing girls to come to Girard College. So it's just been one of those things where I think that I hope that I have made a difference. But sometimes it's very interesting to tell people about what actually happened instead of reading about it. If you can talk to someone firsthand, I think that's very important because they were there. They were there. Many of the things that went on here in Philadelphia, I was not involved, but I knew about it, and I know I picketed at the Criminal Justice Center at 7th and at 6th and Arch Street, because we had a problem with them building that Criminal Justice Center across the street from the African American Museum. And people were getting ready to go to jail. And I want you to know that I took a step way back, because I decided after being in jail in 2 different jails in Baltimore, I decided that I was not going to see what a Philadelphia jail looked like. And that part is very unpleasant, but those are some of the things that you know I have done since then. I've been in a Free Mumia campaign. I knew Mumia because he grew up in the same neighborhood that I grew up in, and I had the pleasure of coaching his youngest daughter in basketball when she was in high school. But that's been a part of my life. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. That's during the civil rights area, my civil rights thing. I did something stupid in 1980. I sued the school district of Philadelphia and the Archdiocese because I was a basketball coach, and my girls kept asking me, how come they can't have a championship game for girls? And whenever I would ask the question, they would say no. So I knew about Title IX. I knew when it passed. I knew what it was all about. So I went across the street, because University City was across the street from the HEW building. And I went to the Office of Civil Rights, and I filed a suit against the school district and the Archdiocese. And you have to be a little touched in the head when you're going to sue the people that sign your check. But that's what I wasn't even thinking about that. I just thought that it's time for people to do the right thing. And I think that's the most important thing that I think you as young people need to understand. When it's time for you guys to vote, please get out there and vote. It will make a difference. A lot of people have died just to vote. And I think it's very important that you exercise that right. So I'm ready for questions if any of you have any.
So you all can unmute yourselves if you want, or you can put it in the chat and I'll ask, and then I'll just kind of read out the questions. But if you have questions about anything that you said, or you want to hear other stories, just put your questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask it directly. So we'll give a minute for folks to get some questions in. So Omar's asking about what happened with the lawsuit. I'm assuming you're referring to the 1980 suit against the district and the Archdiocese. So maybe you can pick up from there. Yeah.
All right. In 1980, there was a championship game, big city game between the Catholic League and the Public League. And of course, what happened is that the Archdiocese said that there's a separation of church and state. However, I had a very good lawyer from Temple University who took my case pro bono, and she went and found all of the Title I money and all of the Title II, Title III, Title V money that the Archdiocese was getting from the state and from the federal government, which made them a part of the federal government that had to abide by the rules. So what they decided to do is, rather than to let the girls play, they decided to take their marbles and go home. And 39 years later, when the Archdiocese, this happened in 2008, when the Archdiocese came into PIAA, and that's when they resumed the games, and I was there to throw up the first ball. But it took them 39 years because that there was no games between the Catholic League and the Public League.
So had the Archdiocese initially claimed that like Title, I guess 9 didn't apply to them because of the separation of church and state, but
yeah, they felt that they were a religious entity, so that the federal government could not make them do anything until the Archdiocese gets money, federal money, for education. Mm-hmm. And Title IX says you cannot discriminate, that females must have the same access. Wherever there's education going on, females must have the same access, equal access. And, it's still going on. in September of 2018, I presented to the new school board about 35 violations that was going on right then and there. Some of them have been corrected. They used to have a practice bus for the smaller schools to take them to their practices for football. And there's a school, Lankenau High School, which is a school that has no public transportation. They were part of Germantown at one time, so they always had a bus to take them to Germantown for practice. And so when the new regime came in, they stopped this bus, and I kept asking, well, why did you stop the bus? And they said they didn't have enough money. But then I said, well, when I presented it to the school district, I said, but you have enough money for 7 football teams to go to practice, but you don't have one bus for these students who want to play a sport to go to Martin Luther King for their practices. And it was like someone had sucked the air out of the room. There was such a hush over the room, but we were able to, deal with that. But I still hear from various coaches and various student athletes that things happen with the girls that don't happen with the boys. The boys get uniforms and the girls get T-shirts. So one day, hopefully, things will get a whole lot better.
Yeah, I really appreciate that helps us understand that, one change in law at one point in history doesn't mean everything changes. It requires constant, monitoring and vigilance. So that's really helpful. Another question. So I've got a series of questions in the chat. So Lynn is asking, have you ever come into contact with any of the leaders of the civil rights movement?
Yes, and sometimes I feel I have some pangs. I did meet John Lewis. There was a woman named Fannie Lou Hamer. I met her. I had the opportunity to shake Martin Luther King's hand just in passing. It was one of those type of things. And then I had I did meet and I escorted who's the little lady? Rosa Parks. Yeah, Rosa Parks came to my church, and I had the distinction of escorting her into my church. Some years before she passed.
Wow.
There were a lot of, and I think I told you this before. You didn't see a lot of the women up front, but they were the backbone. They were in the back making decisions and helping to make the decisions that form, the civil rights movement. The lady from SNCC and CORE and all of those organizations that were trying to knock down the walls of segregation.
Yeah, that's absolutely. If anyone has any follow-up questions about that, put it in the chat. I'm gonna kind of keep moving through some of these questions. There's some good questions in here. So and those are all names we've studied. So that was really great to kind of think about that. So Zach has a question about the Black Panthers. He's curious about the role of the Black Panthers in Philadelphia. How effective were they? So maybe any thoughts, pieces that you're familiar with in terms of the Black Panthers' role here in Philly?
I thought that one of the things that I think that everybody remembers about the Black Panthers is the fact that they were placed outside and made to stand outside without any clothes on. I thought they were making the difference. I thought they were doing things to get people activated into just making them more aware of what was going on in the city of Philadelphia. I mean, some of the things that, if you look at the civil rights movement, from the time of slavery, that's just been the same issues for a long time. And those issues are justice, education, and health. And they seem to be, you know, right here in 2000 and 2020, it is the same issues: education, justice, and health. And we're right in the middle of a pandemic, which has really highlighted the fact that many people are dying because of lack of having, you know, health care. I know that if you take a mother who might not be feeling well, or there might be something going on in her body, and because of her job, if her children need shoes or they need food on the table, she'll put shoes on their feet and food on the table before they would go and see a doctor. I just came across something just a couple of weeks ago. A young lady who I've been mentoring was in a car accident, and she had a little piece of car, and she was doing Uber and Grubhub, and someone hit her and totaled her car. And I said, well, make sure you go to the hospital and get checked out. So a day later, I asked her the next day, I said, did you go to the hospital? She said, I didn't go to the hospital because I don't have any insurance. I don't have, my job doesn't provide any type of insurance. And the thing is that she just graduated in 2019. So of course, no, she doesn't have, you know, she doesn't have any insurance. But this is what happens, you know, and somewhere along the line, maybe 10, 15 years from now, she might have a back problem that gets aggravated because of the accident that she had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Panthers were folks who raised a lot of those issues that you highlighted, and the demand for free healthcare, and the clinics they established, and the demands for education and whatnot. Another question that came in was a question about your parents' support for your advocacy. Were they supportive? What was kind of their reaction, or your family's reaction to the kind of activism and advocacy work that you were doing?
Okay, my father died when I was 10. So, but my mother was from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. She was educated, and they had what at that time called normal schools. Mm-hmm. And she went to a normal school in Maryland, and she was able to teach in the little one-room classroom that they had in her little town. However, when she moved to Philadelphia, that was not the case. She was not allowed to teach. In fact, Philadelphia did not get its first Black teacher until 1951, and that was at Gratz High School. His name was Mr. Glenn. Philadelphia did not have a Black principal until Dr. Ruth Wright Hare came to William Penn. And I believe that was in 1959. So you can see it wasn't really that long ago that Philadelphia schools were, you know, segregated also in terms of having Black teachers in their ranks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful kind of local history. Celia is asking, what would be some advice to the new generations on effective protesting? She said, especially with social media and this new wave of publicized oppression, kind of what would be your advice to folks who are protesting now?
Okay. The one thing I did not tell you, and I think it's important, is the fact that we didn't do this nilly-willy. We were trained. We were trained, number one, not to say anything. We were trained in terms of of not to flinch if when people jumped in your face and threatened you. Just keep your eyes focused on what you were doing. We were trained in how to lock arms when we sat down and protest, but we were also trained not to resist. And because what happened is when you resist, and people get hurt and people get killed. In some cases, we know when we didn't resist, people still were hurt and killed. And we still see that going on, today. You don't resist, you still might get killed. Mm. So that's one of the things that's very important. The other thing is that you need to find a cause. Why are you protesting? Are you protesting for just yourself, or are you protesting for the good of many? And I think that's the one thing that is extremely important. And if you're going to do it, I think it's important that you know the facts, that you know exactly what you're fighting for. And that, if we try to get a change, what that change would look like. And would it be a change for the better? Mm. And for a group of people, and not just a handful of people that might have, selfish motives for what they want to do. There's just so many people that are marginalized right now. And, it's just not the blacks, it's the browns. Right now, I am I'm a little concerned right now about the folks who are Asian. Because, see, a lot of times, we want to put the Asians in one big group. Chinese and Japanese and Koreans and Vietnamese, they are all different groups. And when people start having, they want to do bodily harm against Chinese because they well, what happens, somebody thinks that they started this whole pandemic, which they did not. But I can see that there might be that there has already been in California incidents of violence against people of Asian descent, and they didn't have to be Chinese. They could have been Taiwanese. They could have been from Hong Kong. They could have been from any place else. But we seem to lump people into one big group, because they are a little different or they look different from us, irregardless that the same red blood runs through their veins like they run through everybody else's veins.
Mm-hmm. Quick follow-up. When you said who the folks you were trained, who was that, like CORE doing that training? Or
in Baltimore, it was CORE that gave us the training.
Okay, cool.
The Congress of Racial Equality.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to move to the next question. Zach, could you clarify in the chat what you're asking about? Because you asked if she agreed with certain. Clarify. I'm going to move towards Jewel's question. Jewel asked, have you watched any civil rights movies, I guess, about campaigns that you were involved in? Any kind of films, movies, or videos that you actually were involved in the campaigns that were the subject of the movie?
Well, the Mississippi burning, I remember that quite well, because of they were basically folks who were trying to do voter registration in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And there were demonstrations, there were marches into the little towns, and marches that escorted people to the place where they could register, to vote. And of course, the other big one, there were so many going on in various hamlets and towns throughout the South. And I do remember, I think I was in junior high school, when the young people, the students from North Carolina A&T, sat at Woolworths because Woolworths would not serve them. And my mother showed me that because there was a Woolworths on Ridge Avenue that we could always go into. So, and she reminded me that, that I was going to meet opposition, because she told me early on, you're going to meet opposition because I was a Negro. We've come from a lot of different, I guess every 10 years, every 20 years, there's a different way of talking about minorities. When I was growing up, somebody called you Black, they were fighting words, okay? Because at that time, way back when my mom was coming along, she was colored. And then we became Negroes. And then we became Black or African Americans. So, and it all boils down to basically, the same thing. So we knew that my mother always said that sometimes if they want you to go a mile, go 2 miles, because you get measured by a different yardstick. But I think that is for any young person, that just don't do the minimum. Just don't go beyond that, and make your mark. And don't be afraid to make your mark. Sometimes you might get into a situation where it doesn't turn out the way you want it to turn out. And you might have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. And, try to make things right.
So I'm going to try and run through these. We've got about 10 more questions in our last 15 minutes. So Jude asked a follow-up to the Freedom Rides. Were you aware of the danger that was ahead of you when doing the Freedom Rides?
At 18 and 19 years old, who is afraid? Yeah, what are you afraid of? You are invincible. Nothing's going to hurt you. Nothing's going to harm you. You are invincible. Your parents will tell you there's a hole down the street, walk to the left side. No, you're going to walk right down the middle, fall in. And that's the way it is, with young people. That's the way it is. No, I never thought about that. While we were doing it, no, we didn't think about that, because we knew after we did our voter registration, when we came back to where we were staying, it was going to be a party, because that's what college kids do. They party.
I think it's really helpful to hear kind of this piece of it, which we don't tend to read too much about in the accounts and the sources that I've engaged my students in, is kind of like, that there's this kind of socialization, social camaraderie, kind of hanging out piece of all this that is really important to kind of highlight too.
Right. And there were two things going on. I had a principal at my high school, and we talked about what he did in the summer of 1963. He was at Woodstock, and I was at the March to Washington. But when it all came out, he said we were all college students, having a good time. Mm-hmm. Because, Woodstock made an impact, a social impact also. Mm-hmm.
Marina asked your opinion about what movement do you think has made the biggest difference? So Marina, I'm not sure if you're referring to which movement out of a few specific ones you were curious about, whether it was civil rights movement, Black Power movement, movements prior to that. But I guess, Ms. Jones, you can kind of interpret it as you wish.
Well, I think the civil rights movement has, whenever people want to talk about anything, they refer back to the civil rights movement. They even did that last week when they protested at the state capitol and saying that they were the civil rights people for opening up the states during this pandemic. um, because people knew about that. And I think that people came from all over at that particular time. They came from all over, regardless of religion, regardless of their financial status, because they felt that there was a need for equality. And that need for equality, I think, has stemmed other marches that have come around. We had a big fight with Roe versus Wade, which is at this point, I'm waiting to see what's going to happen because that's in danger. We have a Voting Rights Act that's in danger. And I think that even with this pandemic, I think there's going to be, demonstrations and how large they're going to be, because the civil rights movement, became a movement not only in the South, but it sort of permeated its way into the urban centers, into the urban cities, because they began to understand that even though it was a little different in the South, there was still some civil rights issues that were going on in the cities, that a lot of people sort of, overlooked. In the South, you could see the Klansmen. And that's another thing. I saw the Klansmen. You saw them in their robes. And even when I saw them in their robes, I guess, I have this thing about myself where if things don't go right, I used to tease my students. I said, don't mess with me. I'm from North Philly. I had this, I'm supposed to have this toughness persona about me, which I really don't have, because my friends tell me, oh, please. But, when I saw them, the people standing, the Ku Klux Klan standing there, it was just amazing. It was to see them in their robes and everything. And, one of the things that I've always said, that if they really believed in what they were doing, then why you hide your face? If you really believe that you're doing the right thing, why hide your face? You saw that in Charlottesville, folks hiding their face, hiding behind what? You believe in it, then stand up and say, I believe this, I believe in this cause.
I'm going to skip around the questions a little bit. I'm going to combine Angelina and Dee Dee's questions about history in high school. So Angelina asked, what were, when you were in high school, what were you taught about African-American history? And then Dee Dee's follow-up to that is, what did you wish you were taught?
Okay. Dee Dee, let me say this to you. When I was in high school, we did not have anything close. It took me a while to understand that Egypt was in Africa, because of course the way they taught it, you thought Egypt was someplace else, that everybody in Egypt looked like Cleopatra. Well, I mean, looked like Elizabeth Taylor. Mm-hmm. So it took me a while. I'm looking at the geography test. Oh, Egypt is on the continent of Africa. Well, I'm going to tell you how you have an African American history class. Now, I can't remember what year it was, but the reason you have an African American history class is because students in Philadelphia went to the Board of Education, which used to be at 21st and the Parkway. And this is during the time of Rizzo's reign. You can look this up, but students from the Philadelphia School District marched down and asked if they could have a Black history class, only to be chased away by the mounted police of Philadelphia. Look it up. Look it up. We have not had African American history for it's been a while. I can't remember, was it in the 80s? It might have been in the 80s or the late 70s when this happened, but students from the Philadelphia School District demanded that African American history, and I think it was spearheaded by the young people from Ben Franklin and Simon Gratz High School.
Yeah, and Edison and Germantown were involved too.
Right.
Yeah, we study that in September. All my 10th graders learn we study newspaper articles of the 1967 walkouts. So they should all be familiar with that story. So
right.
Yep. So yeah, because when you were in high school, there was no African American history class. I assume there was a U.S. history class.
Yeah, U.S. history, world history. And then you had where it was civics, where you do.
Yeah. Did they emphasize? Did they emphasize kind of the importance of race in the story of the United States, or the importance of Black history at all, or no?
No.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why they asked for it, because a lot of the things that they talked about was a result of things that happen, particularly to minorities.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and it was even brought to the forefront when I was at University City High School. The students there got a better understanding because we had 53 nationalities at University City High School. A good majority of them came from Africa. And we did what we call the fishbowl, and maybe it might be something you guys might be interested in. We had a fishbowl where the kids from other countries would talk about their life living in villages and what have you. One story was about a girl from Ethiopia, I believe. And she said her mother and father pushed her brother and her on a boat. And that's the last time she's ever seen her parents, to get them out of the war zone. We had kids from Vietnam and Laos who talked about the wars that were going on there, how their villages were burnt. And it just gives you, empathy, because you find out, hey, living in the United States where sometimes we don't get justice, but there are people all over the world who don't get justice. And a lot of times it has to do with the poverty level, the background, and even just the color of their skins. We know what we did to the original Americans. We know what's happening with the Indians, Indian population.
So I'm going to move through a few more questions in our last 5 minutes. Isaiah was asking about the Black Panther Party, kind of a follow-up. Was curious if you knew people who were in the Panther Party, and I guess if you had any stories you wanted to share about them.
Well, I when they would have their meetings, I know I had a chance to see them, not up close and personal, but I saw Bobby Seale and Huey Newton when they would come and talk to us about what's going on. When they would talk about nationalism and socialism, and being armed so that we wouldn't get hurt as a group of people. And I think they were very much misunderstood, because people really didn't. I think the Black Panther Party was a little misunderstood, because there was I guess you call it the old guard, just like with anything else. My nieces right now are in the forefront of whatever demonstration that they're doing a demonstration with the housing authority, because they don't feel that the housing authority does enough, or they don't do the things they're supposed to do to help people have, better housing. And I know I went to one rally with them, and I was I wasn't really happy with it. I mean, I was there to support them, but sometimes, the way you do it, in my estimation, the way I was taught to, have a protest, and the way folks do protests now, they throw things, they use profanity, they call you names and all, and it's very boisterous. Um, if you look at some of the pictures of the old Civil War, you didn't hear a whole bunch of noise. You heard dogs and water hoses and other people talking, but you didn't hear too many of the people who were protesting doing a lot of talking. And sometimes I think that we get into our own way, because if you can't hear each other, then where are we going to have this who's going to win? Where is the compromise?
So there's a few more. Omar asked, is there a specific person that you would accredit with having the largest influence on your advocacy?
I guess it would probably, would be my mother. And I have to say this, a lot of times she didn't know I was going on the march to Washington. I just told her I'd be back. I told her that. When I went down to Mississippi, my some friends of mine from Morgan said, we're going down to Mississippi to do some voter registration. You want to come with us? And I wasn't working during the summer, so I said, yeah, why not? Let's go. And what I should have done is put stock in Greyhound, because Greyhound was my best friend.
Isaiah's.
I don't know if they still have Greyhound now or not. Like that's a bus company.
Yeah, still around. Although I usually take Megabus. Isaiah's asking about your thoughts on Malcolm X. Were you aware? Did you agree with some of the ideas Malcolm X would preach to the masses? What are your thoughts on Malcolm X, Isaiah asks?
Yes, I love Malcolm X. When I speak at various places, I use a lot of his quotes. I think that, particularly by any means necessary, I think that it's so poignant. Malcolm and Martin, they had the same idea, but they approached it differently, which I really didn't have a problem, with Malcolm. I think that in the beginning he was a little wild, the things that he said about the Jews and white folks and all that sort of stuff. But the day he made Hajj and went to Mecca and turned around and saw people of all colors, of all persuasions, giving allegiance to Allah, when he realized that, we're all in this fight together. We're going to be on this boat together. It's either going to sink or it's going to sail. And but I the impact that Martin has had on people, and if you have not read his autobiography, please do so. Please read his autobiography. It is enlightening. It's just enlightening when he found out that, Martin and Malcolm can get along together and be brothers. And I don't really think that there was a real, people wanted to think that there was a contentious spirit between the two of them. They just went about doing things a little bit different, Malcolm came from grassroots. He came from the urban city. He was rough and ready. Martin was always comes from, a well-educated, background. So, but, the two can get along together. Sometimes sometimes you got to make a lot of noise. Sometimes you just
Mm-hmm.
can't be quiet all the time. Sometimes you got to make noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really appreciate that. That highlights a lot of things we talked about when we had our seminars on Ella Baker, Malcolm X, and Dr. King. So that's really great. There's just I think 2 or 3 more questions left in the chat before we close. There are kind of 2 Black Panther related questions. One asks, Dee Dee's asking, what was the emotional strain of being a Black woman fighting with the Panthers? Did you ever get pushed aside or underestimated? I think her question assumes you were a member of the Panthers, which I don't think you were necessarily.
No, I know.
But I want to share thoughts on that.
Yeah, I remember people who were members of the Black Panther Party here in Philadelphia. However, you have to always remember, during that particular period of time, women were an afterthought. Mm-hmm. So it was the men who were always in the forefront. Okay, but we all what they say, wherever there's a good man, there's a good woman behind them. I mean, they were there for support, and they were there, talking to people, about, the same thing. And again, the Panthers were about education and about self-defense and guarding yourself from police brutality. That has been, Philadelphia has been known for police brutality. And I think that was one of the things that the Black Panther movement here in the city focused on. And I think that's why the police was so hard on them in terms of policing them. But then too, you have to understand, even during that particular period of time, there weren't that many Black policemen.
So there's kind of 2 remaining questions. Aiden asked, among the Panthers, this is another Black Panther question, did you feel legitimate support from Northern liberals, or was that overwhelmed by racist backlash from white power? So I guess from your point of observation, were you able to kind of notice more support for the Panthers or less support from kind of liberal whites, that kind of thing?
I think that they started out in California. I think that they were demonized before they could really make an impact. That's my when you saw these guys in black pants, black shirts, black berets, they gave you a feeling, or at least society gave them a feeling. Or the media, I guess, gave people the feeling that they don't get into their way because you may end up getting hurt. And rather than you getting hurt, this is why I believe the Philadelphia police was so hard, on the Black Panthers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about how the FBI's campaign was so effective in kind of demonizing them, but there are those kind of stories that get lesser heard around the donations they received from white grocery store owners for the free breakfast program, the white doctors who serviced folks at their clinics. So it's kind of that support and backlash, kind of both pieces are there. But
people started to equate them with the Communist Party, which, don't forget, we were still in that Cold War type of situation.
Yeah.
We can't think of doing something on our own unless it's going to be destructive. But the thing is, we're doing free lunches and free dinners. They started that. Yep. They started free breakfast for children. And the health clinics, and the treatment of disease. And at that time, the big disease that they were fighting for was sickle cell.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So last question. Lynn asked, do you evaluate after acting whether the course chosen was in fact the best path? So I guess maybe kind of your thoughts looking back on some of the paths chosen. Yeah.
I am extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to be part of something that people are still talking about. At the time, we didn't appreciate what was going on because we thought this is what we're supposed to do, but we were having fun. We were still having fun. And when I believe in a cause, you know, I will continue to fight. I told the other class from Central that even at this stage of the game, while I'm sitting here, I'm formulating letters to go to the superintendent of schools, Mr. Height, because there's some things that really bother me right now with the school district. I spent 42 years in this school district. The best job I think I've ever had in my life. I love working with young people. But I still see some things that really, really bother me. And as a coach, I'm really involved in sports. And I looked at that draft. I don't know how many people looked at the draft. I don't know how many of you are interested in sports. But I looked at the draft only to wonder how many of our kids, at one point, we had a lot of people, a lot of young folks being represented in the NFL, in the NBA, from Philadelphia. But right now, I'm wondering whether or not they are given the same opportunity and whether or not they're giving the same type of classes. I go to the NCAA conventions every year, and they keep changing the rules about the classes you need to take. Because if you don't take the right classes, you will not get an athletic scholarship. And I know that the people from Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, and I'm there from Philadelphia, and we talk about there's some students, you may get algebra 1 and algebra 2 and geometry, and that's as far as it goes. And if the NCAA says you need to have 4 years of a math program and it has to be higher math, and your school doesn't offer but 3 math courses, you're screwed. You're screwed. You know, there are some schools in Philadelphia where you can only take one language. You folks at Central are extremely fortunate that you have more than one language that you can, you know, you can choose from. Or that the science classes, you know, you get physical science, biology, and chemistry. Physics? Are you kidding, please? Some schools do not offer physics. They don't offer calculus. And this is the inequality that bothers me at this stage of the game.
Yeah. So on that note, we're going to close. And I think that really is a great note to close on in terms of like the way in which, you know, while there was a lot of activism and organizing in your past, it's clear that you remain very vigilant in what is going on in kind of these communities and districts that you were a part of. And so it's really kind of an honor to kind of, you know, have you kind of share your perspective, both from the past and what you're thinking about currently.
Right. And I like what Isaiah said, the fight never ends.
Yes.
It doesn't end. It doesn't end. There's always, you have to keep going. You have to keep fighting.
Yep. So thank you, Ms. Jones, and thank you all for asking questions and engaging with her.
Thank you, guys, and I pray for you. I'm so disappointed that your school year is not going as it has gone in the past, but this too will pass and we will get through this.
Yes. So there's lots of thank yous coming through in the chat. Yeah. So awesome. I'm going to be the last one to leave. So if anyone needs to kind of hang out and chat with me about anything course related or anything else, let me know. Kevin, if you're still on, I know that we're going to chat. So if you could hang out, that would be great. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, Ms. Jones. This was wonderful. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.